The fertility rate has fallen for the third year in a row to reach a record low in England, Wales and Scotland. Figures from the Office for National Statistics show that the average number of children women can expect to have in England and Wales is now 1.41, the lowest recorded since data was first collected in 1938, while the Scottish rate is 1.25. The average age of parents is also continuing to rise, with mothers aged 31 and fathers 33 and 9 months. Well, to discuss what might be behind these figures and what they could mean for the UK population and women's lives, I'm joined by Dr. Bernice Kuang, fertility and family researcher at the University of Southampton. Welcome to Woman's Hour. Right, let's get into some of these figures. Overall decline of fertility rate since 2010. Why has that happened? What's going on, Bernice?
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. Fertility has declined, and our research has specifically looked at disaggregating this decline by first, second, and third births. And we found that the decline in the last, since 2010, is a lot of that is accounted for by declines in the first birth. So people are putting off having that first birth. Once they do have that first birth, so far, most people still do tend to have that second or third child. So the average family size in the UK is still around 2 for people who do have children. But that decline is mostly declines in first births, and now increasingly among people across social groups. So historically, you might have seen more educated or affluent people putting on, postponing starting a family, but now we see more and more people across social groups might do that as well. And
an average age rise in the age of parents in 2 decades, it's increased by 2 years.
So age of first parents is, I think, not always the most specific or precise measure, because it includes not just first-time parents, but people having their second and third children as well. So the average age of first birth for the first child is around 30, which is high. But when I ask my students, my undergrads, if they think it's high, they're like, "What? No, that sounds perfectly average and normal." No, not news to me at all.
So what's happened? What's changed in women's lives?
Well, in women's lives and young men's lives and everyone's lives, I think young people now, we find that they're very reluctant to start a family if they feel apprehension about their futures and economic uncertainty. I mean, the reason we know all this really nuanced, great information about the UK, like young people in the UK as a whole, is because of the survey we work on, which is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, called the Generations and Gender Survey, rolled out for the first time in the UK. So now we have this great information about Gen Z, millennials and older millennials, and even younger Gen X. And a lot of it is linked to economic uncertainty and, just a little bit of pessimism about the future.
Is it a temporary drop? Do you think this could be reversed?
Well, people may continue to postpone having children because, like the young people I talk to in class and at the university, they don't think 30 is old at all. So if that age continues to climb to 31, 32, we will continue to see the fertility levels decline. But if it stops climbing, we may see a little bit of a rebound or a plateauing. And then on the flip side, of course, if people do postpone starting a family and then run out of time to have the 2 or 3 children that they want, then we'll also see the average family size decline in the UK.
And
so far, it's been very robust in the UK. Like there's a very strong 2-child norm in the UK. People really like 2 or more children.
What's the impact of this decline? The long-term impact? What could happen?
Well, to me, the most important long-term impact is that I don't think it's acceptable if young people want to have children and they feel so pessimistic about the futures that they don't feel like they can. So I don't think that's acceptable from a human rights perspective. Reproductive freedom is important, and that includes both being, not having children if you don't want children, but being able to have children if you want them. It's a pretty, universal human want. It's not extravagant. It shouldn't be a luxury item. So I think that's the most important impact. But of course, policymakers will always talk about, the size of the working population, how, if there's really low fertility, then we may see like a dearth of working age adults later in the future that can impact the economy.
Yeah, I mean, you see that in places around the world. Can you give us some context about what's happening elsewhere? I know that you specifically have looked at Western Europe, but you can give us a broad brush look at what's happening in other countries.
Sure. So these kinds of declines are happening across Europe, and in high-income countries like in East Asia, like Japan, Singapore, in many Western countries. And there's cross-national differences, right? So in some countries, having a one-child family may be completely normal. So there's differences in those cultural norms, but fertility is declining in a lot of countries. The UK is certainly not alone in that way. And not only that, but in countries where we have, historically seen that fertility has been very robust because of strong support for parents and, higher levels of gender equality, like in Scandinavian countries, they're also grappling with, trying to figure out this puzzle of why fertility keeps declining. So the UK is not alone in seeing this fertility decline. And in Europe in particular, there's been a lot of interest in how the role of economic uncertainty can help us understand why, young people are reluctant to start families.
So you've done the research, Bernice. You've spoken to young people and your students. Break it down for us. Kind of tell us about, is it, when you say economic uncertainty, what are the concerns of people who are choosing not to or putting off having children?
Well, one great thing about the Generations and Gender Survey is that it's the only UK study that we know of that asks about the actual cost of childcare. And childcare is prohibitive for many families, especially lower income families. Lower income families spend a larger proportion of their household income on childcare than higher income families. So childcare is absolutely prohibitive. And I think young people are becoming more and more aware of that before they start a family. They know, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to be ready to pay an arm or leg for childcare. Housing obviously is very unaffordable. And in the UK, there's still a little bit of a social norm, a cultural norm, that you own a house before you start a family. Now that's slowly changing, and people do have children start their families in private rented accommodation, but private rented accommodation is not always stable. You can be asked to leave whenever, and it's not always high quality. So, there's variation. There's a need for there to be consistent quality private accommodation. A lot of people talk about fears about the climate change, but our data hasn't really found that there's a strong link between people being worried about climate change and then also saying, oh, no, I don't plan to have children. So yeah, those are three common things we hear about all the time. And
what about women
which makes a lot of sense, right?
Of course, yeah, childcare, very important. What about women in the workforce?
Oh, so another great thing about our study is that we found that childcare still continues to be very, very unequally divided, even between families where both the mom and the dad unfortunately, it's very heteronormative,
sure.
but unfortunately, so even where both parents work full-time, are engaged in paid work outside of the home, childcare remains persistently unequally divided. And, the difficulty of reconciling work and family life can also be an impediment for some people, especially young people who have different priorities and expectations for what they want their lives to look like.
There is a perspective and a point of view where people say, surely this is better for the health of the planet overall, for there to be less humans on it.
Yeah. I have to say, okay, well, technically, yes, if you don't exist, then yes, you can't consume. But that's like throwing literally the baby out with the bathwater. There's so many other things the world can do to mitigate environmentally related issues. So many things that can be done on a structural level, a corporate level. It's like feeling guilty about not being able to recycle the plastic your vegetables come in when there's so many other things that should be done before you as one individual feel guilty about sorting your recycling properly. Everyone should try to sort their recycling properly, but I think it's a little bit of a post facto kind of justification. There are so many better things and more ethical things that should be addressed before individuals need to feel bad about the very universal human desire to want a family.
And if we keep going, if the trend keeps going this way and we're having fewer and fewer children, what could the long-term impact be? I know you mentioned briefly that there'd be a decline in the workforce. This is quite a serious thing, right?
There could. People usually point to immigration as a way to mitigate workforce shortages, but migrants eventually age as well, and it's not an easy environment for a lot of migrants in a lot of places, not just the UK. So it can certainly impact the size of the working population, and it probably will.
And so, what's your thought for what are governments doing doing about it?
Not enough. So,
what should they be doing about it?
They should be helping it, the way I see it, and the way what our data points to is that young people really need a lot more support in getting their lives started. The transition to adulthood is a lot more destandardized now, where young people have more options, but they also have, in some ways, constrained opportunities. So, like securing housing, securing stable work, that all of that is very difficult for young people today. So unfortunately, it's not news, and it's not the most exciting, novel answer. But we go to this research, and again, it kind of tells us that your economic circumstances are really important to deciding to have children or not.
Equality, could that be something that's we should be looking at?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always hesitate when talking about sort of pro-natalist policies, so to speak, because the last thing we want is for reproductive freedom to be rolled back or family planning access. Sure. I think equality, especially in the division of childcare, needs to be supported. So our work found that in families where flexible working was used by the father, these families tended to divide childcare more equally. So this push towards, return to office is maybe not going to be very good for father engagement. And father engagement is really important because it's good for men and it's good for children. So the structural thing is to continue to support, uplift, the journey towards equality are really important. It's very well known that the pay gap opens as soon as women have children, and it never closes across a lifetime. Across an entire lifetime, you will never make up your earnings deficit, even if you made more money than your partner before you had children. I mean, it's quite galling, but I'm sure it's not a surprise to most of the listeners that these continue to be the circumstances in 2025.
Yeah, certainly not the Woman's Hour listeners anyway. Bernice, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Bernice Kuang there, 848